And Brian Tamaki may be launching another bid for Parliament this morning. There are rumours that this time it will be as leader of Freedoms NZ. We were expecting to have Bishop Brian on the programme today, but we couldn't agree on the terms of that interview. So we've invited a man who knows the Bishop better than most. Dr. Peter Lineham is a retired Massey University history professor, and in 2013 Penguin published his book on Brian Tamaki, Destiny. Welcome to the nation.
Pleasure to be here.
So what do you make of the rumours at this stage that Brian may be the leader out front, the face of a political party this time?
There's been striking evidence that the Tamakis have been moving into a much more political realm. And I think ever since lockdown and the debate over mandates, that's been critical to their self-understanding. I think in some ways, Brian's less interested in the religious side these days and much more interested in public profile. Of course, he's been there before.
Yes, absolutely. And why do you think that is, Peter?
Well, there's been quite a careful succession plan for his son to take over at Destiny in the church. And the church, I think in some ways he's been a pastor for a very long time, remember. You know, he's done his 40 years. And so there comes a point where I think he wants to be free of the day-to-day affairs. There's been a fair bit of holidaying, I notice, in the Tamakis recently. Noticed the story about their visit to Gallipoli and in first-class travel. So in some ways there's a search for a new direction. But also, I think he senses that this is a political moment in New Zealand, waiting for a different voice.
And he did seize onto he was at the protest down in Parliament and this anti-mandate kind of movement. But how does that line up with his views, his religious views, I suppose?
Oh, well, there's no question about it that it fits very tidily with Brian's emphasis on personal freedoms and personal responsibility. And that's the big theme behind the anti-mandates move, undoubtedly. And it also feeds into that kind of tone which we're picking up from America and which Brian follows fairly carefully, of this interest in Christian nationalism, as it's termed.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of recognisable themes in Tamaki's sort of pitch from the Christian nationalists in the United States. I notice there's fear of immigration, voter suppression, climate change, and they're sort of weaving a story about national identity, aren't they? And sort of having to be saving ourselves.
Yes, and to be fair to Brian, he has held this position very, very firmly for many years. He sees himself as the advocate for the true New Zealand. He sees himself, for example, when there was a discussion about some kind of religious document that would declare all faiths equal, he was very anxious and campaigned to put a strong voice for the Christian roots of New Zealand. And so he's following a kind of meaningful trajectory that, as you say, is shaped in an American framework, except, of course, he's Māori. And that does add an interesting extra dimension to it.
I want to talk to you a little bit more about that, but I also want to sort of come back because we have to be frank here too, that Brian Tamaki's views are abhorrent to a lot of people. You know, recently he said that God sent a cyclone to the Hawke's Bay to punish people for watching porn. So this, it's going to be difficult for him. You know, this is a very marginal sort of view in many respects.
Yes, and I think that Brian's goal is in fact to see himself as the leader, the Freedoms Party, to see himself as the expression and the leader of those who feel disgruntled with the liberal trend, as he sees it, of New Zealand society. And it'd be fair to say that there is a liberal trend in New Zealand society. What is the real question is just what kind of support is there for this anti-liberal trend?
Yeah, absolutely. And because that ties into what's happening in the US as well. Society is changing. It is getting more diverse. And I think that there's lots of analysis there that the churches feel that's diminishing their role, and they have a fear of that.
Well, of course, from his point of view, there's no fear. I mean, his church is in a strong position as he would see it, and his type of church is in a stronger position than many of the traditional churches. And so he may well, in fact, be well, I'd say perhaps a little bit deluded about the extent of public support for this. I mean, I'd say there's a hard core of anti-mandates tradition, which is now becoming all sorts of other things. Anti-co-governance is the big theme of the moment, though where Brian would stand on that is an interesting one. But I think that it's quite a limited sector. I mean, I'd put it at around, at the most, 5% of the population.
Yes, it is fascinating, isn't it? Do you think that he could feel emboldened as well by what we're seeing in the United States with Roe v. Wade, for example, and some of these changes, big changes that are taking place?
Oh, I think he's enormously encouraged by that. I think he is drawing a new kind of political creed from the very, very striking shifts and divisions in public opinion in the States. Yes.
We understand, that he's sort of brought together the Outdoors and Freedom Party and possibly a farming group. We don't know that yet. These are, apart from those anti-mandate views, they have disparate sort of interests, don't they? What do you think that being in a coalition with somebody like Brian could be like?
Well, we already know, because in the previous case, in the 2008 election, there was the drawing together of two political factions, and there's over several elections there were attempts at this, and in every case Brian Tamaki did not behave in a manner that endeared himself to the other parties, because he is inclined to make preemptory decisions. He does see himself as an anointed apostle, and so when he sees something clearly, it, I think, doesn't occur to him that consultation with others might be the most desirable approach.
He's used to being the ringmaster.
Indeed.
In the circus.
Totally. And you see in his church that is powerfully endorsed. And so to move out of that space and to move into a more pluralist space, and as you say, the odd thing about the Freedoms Coalition is that they're not really united on anything except what they dislike. So there's a series of negatives, but virtually impossible to state a precise positive position.
And what do you think? We're looking into sort of, the future here a little bit, I suppose, but what do you think it would be like for Brian if he did get down to Parliament?
Well, there's a few precedents for priests in Parliament, and some of them are really quite striking. Arnold Nordmeyer, for example, or David Clark. So there are people who've held this position, but they have usually learned that that manner does not apply in Parliament, where you have to make your way through the rules and through the Speaker and through the traditions of that place. It would be an enormous learning curve, I would have thought. It would be entertaining.
And based on the result last election, 99.9% of New Zealanders said no thanks to Brian. It is a real long shot, isn't it?
Oh, I think it is a long shot. But there is a space there. And the trouble is that lots of people are vying for that space. And I'm not sure that Tamaki's solution is going to be the one that appeals.
Well, we will have to wait and see. Peter Lynham, thank you so much for joining us on the program this morning.